Well, thanks, Dean. So, has anybody noticed that the world is changing? I spend a lot of my time working in the business world and working with businesses, so I think about it and I see it mostly in that environment. But this whole thing about Generation Y and Generation Z flooding into the workforce and kind of demanding a different kind of work environment, that's real, right? I'm working with companies that are having a real hard time with that shift. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with 200 CEOs from some of the world's largest companies. And at this meeting, they came to an agreement, and what they put out of that meeting was that they said that the role of businesses in our society fundamentally needed to change. That no longer was it acceptable for the sole purpose of a business to be focused on maximizing shareholder value, right? This is a big shift, right? What they said is that their companies needed to begin to invest more internally on their people and on the communities that they were a part of. So, I don't think that this is just happening in the business world. In fact, I think that we're at a pretty pivotal point in our society. You know, for the early part of our country's development, one of the things that was kind of a uniting and bonding thing was these core values that we all seem to share. And mostly those core values aligned with kind of the Judeo-Christian value set, right? And there's an argument that says that the values of the church throughout the early 20th century could have served as a proxy for culture in the United States and in America as a whole. But in recent years, our society has become increasingly unmoored from the values of organized religion, right? No longer can you assume that the person sitting next to you has similar views on morality or sexuality or religion or politics. Politics, even if you're both Democrats or if you're both Republicans, you could have very differing views, right? You can no longer assume that the person sitting next to you has similar views on the use of marijuana, right? The role of men and women in society, or even the implicit identity of what it means to be a man or a woman, right? And regardless of whether you think that these shifts in our society are positive or negative, right? Increasingly, we have become a country without a clear culture or a defined set of values. So why does any of this matter, right? Firstly, because we as humans have a distinct need to surround ourselves with people who believe what it is that we believe. That's essentially what culture is. Culture is just a shared set of beliefs and values and experiences, right? And when we surround ourselves with people who believe what we believe, you get something called trust. Trust is interesting because it is the essential platform for building relationships, for creating interdependence, and ultimately for any kind of organizational success. In short, shared culture is the foundation of trust, and trust is the foundation of any kind of group success. But you don't need some business professor to tell you that culture is important, right? You intuitively know that culture is important because you choose to be around people who believe what you believe, right? Whether you spent Friday night at the bar, or Saturday afternoon at the college football game, or Sunday morning at church, you are working to put yourself in the proximity of people who believe similarly to what you believe. But increasingly, we're finding ourselves in environments where we're unsure about the beliefs and the values of the people around us. As leaders in our community, you're playing a critical role in steering your businesses, your nonprofits, your government agencies, your educational institutions. But we're doing this within a national culture that is increasingly diverse. The people that we're hiring and that we're leading have a diverse and a divided value set more now than ever, right? But that doesn't change the fact that our people still need security and certainty and trust. And more than ever, people are looking for that group, that place of shared belief, the safe haven for shared belief, to exist within the business environment. Listen, we've known for years that it takes more than a big strategic plan or a shiny new product to make a successful organization, right? Ask any successful leader and they'll tell you that their organization is not just made up of products or effective processes, but that their organization is made up of a group of exceptional people who are aligned around a common vision and a common set of values. And it's this combination of products, processes, and most importantly, people that are required to be successful in a competitive marketplace. As Patrick Lencioni would say, if you could get all of the people in your organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry, in any market, against any competition at any time. And I'm inclined to agree with him. However, now more than ever, we are going to need to, as leaders, work very hard to get all of our people rowing in the same direction. Businesses with strong organizational cultures have proven time and time again that they're more profitable, they're more productive, they have lower turnover, and that they're able to gain a competitive advantage in a marketplace through the people that they hire and the kinds of internal cultures that they're able to create. Companies like Chick-fil-A and Google and Apple and Starbucks are icons for the value and the power of internal organizational culture. So given the importance of this internal culture, and given the increasing diversity of the value set of our society at large, I'm arguing that now more than ever, it is important for businesses and for other organizations to be very intentional, to take steps towards creating these kinds of internal cultures. But how do we do it with so much cultural discord in our society? Well, the obvious answers is that we need to define what kind of internal culture that we want to create. We need to develop leaders who align with this kind of internal culture. And then we need to do the hard work of teaching and communicating and training our people in and around our values, right? But the other piece that we need to do is we need to start to build systems around our people so that we can measure our culture and our people, right? We need to be able to manage our people side of our business in the same way that we manage the financial side of our business through human capital dashboards, just like we have financial capital dashboards, right? And these things are all good, right? These are things that we should all be working on, but the reality is that these things are going to take some time. And what I don't have right now is time. In fact, I've probably got about 8 minutes left. So here's what I want to do. I want to share with you one simple tool that I think will help you look at your organization a little bit differently, right? This is a framework through which you can see your organization. And if you are committed to building a culturally driven organization, I think you can also use it as a high-level assessment tool to help you view your company or your organization and the people who are within it. So I call it the culture quadrant, right? And so here's how it works. Most organizations are really focused on getting the very best talent that they can get for the positions in their organization. And this is really important, right? You can't have bumbling idiots walking around your organization not knowing what they're supposed to be doing, right? But if you are going to be a culturally driven organization, you also need an additional lens, right? You also need to look at your company through the lens of culture. And I call this additional lens, right, culture fit. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to help you to create and start to align your people around a core set of values, right? So before we jump into, so that we've got our quadrant, the outside of our quadrant, before we jump into filling up the different squares within the quadrant, I want you to think about your organization as a kingdom, okay? And then I want you to think about the handful of core values that you want your people living and breathing every day as your code of honor. And then we're just going to go ahead and dive headlong into this medieval metaphor. And I want you to think about your people as your soldiers, right, or your army, right? These are the people that you're going to go, that you're going into battle with to win clients, to serve your customers, and to overcome your competition, right? So these kinds of people are pretty important. So the very first part of this quadrant, this is the people who we have low ability and low culture fit. We're going to call this person the peasant. Now, that doesn't mean that the peasant does not have any abilities, right? They're probably wonderful farmers. They may just not be great swordsmen, right? And in your army, you need a swordsman, right? So here's what I want you to think about your people and be mindful that they might have talents or they might have cultural values. They just aren't specifically the talents or the abilities that you need them to have, or the culture or the value that aligns with your organization, right? So the general rule with the peasant, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the peasant because you can't build an army full of peasants, right? You generally want to try to not hire a peasant. And if you have peasants within your organization, you want to try to help them find another field to plow, right? But above the peasant, right, with similar ability, but in this quadrant where we see a much higher degree of culture fit, we have the page, right? So the page, these are the people in medieval times that would always follow the knights around and help them strap their armor on and help them clean their sword, right? The page is a person within your organization who they may not be the very best at their craft yet, right? They may not be the best swordsman. They may not be the person who's going to go and accomplish the difficult task, but man, do they believe in what you believe in, right? They've got your crest on their tunic. They are excited about who you are, and they are aligned with your culture. Now, here's the general rule for the pages in your organization, is that you need to invest in them, right? The goal for the page is that you spend some time and some energy trying to train them and upskill them so that they can become the very best soldier in your army that they can become, right? And the reason you do this is because in a culture-driven organization, finding people who align with your culture is very difficult to do. So we want to keep these kinds of people, and we want to invest in them. Now, in the upper right-hand corner, we have this next quadrant. Now, these are the people who are both very high ability and very culturally aligned with what you're trying to, the culture you're trying to create in your kingdom. We call these people your knights, and they're the best soldiers that you have, right? They're really good at what they do, right? Whether it's the sales sword or the logistics lance or the management mace, they're really good at with their chosen weapon, right? And they really believe in what it is that you stand for. Now, the general rule with knights is that you need to make these people into organizational heroes, right? We need to praise these people in public. We need to honor them and treat them well, because they are the core to what we're trying to create. But the other thing that we need to do with knights is we need to be very intentional about having them mentor our pages. One of the things that some of the exceptional companies in the area of culture do is they are very intentional about having their knights mentor their pages. Now, we're going to move to this bottom quadrant, and you may be wondering, well, why did Alan not leave the knights for last? What's this bottom quadrant down here? Well, the reason I leave it for last is because I actually think this is the trickiest quadrant. This is the place where I think that you might actually have a problem. And we call this quadrant the mercenary, right? The mercenary is a person whose high ability, they're really good at what they do. They're pretty low culture fit. And here's the problem. They look an awful lot like a knight, but you'll notice they're not wearing your crest or your sigil, right? They're at the end of the day, the mercenary is selling their services for gold, right? They're not really committed or bought into the values or the honor code of the kingdom, right? And this is where I see most aspirational culture kingdoms kind of start to falter, because Here's the deal. To be a truly culture-driven organization, you need to have strong cultural values. And then you need to have a group of people who are aligned around those values. That's just what it's got to be, right? And if these mercenaries exist within your organization, though very talented, right? Like this very well may be your very best salesperson. Or this may be the only person who understands IT in your whole company. But if these mercenaries exist within your company and they're not living by the code that you've set forth that's supposed to define your organization, everyone's going to know, right? And just by their presence, they're going to send a very clear message to the rest of your army. And that message is that the values of this kingdom aren't really that important. In fact, the message that it sends loud and clear is that the number one value of this kingdom is production. So, here's the general rule for mercenaries, right? Though they're very, very talented, right? They're culturally misaligned. And so the rule is that you don't hire them, though there may be a great deal of pressure to fill this spot in your company. Or if they're already in your company, you need to help them segue out. Because you just can't build a culturally driven organization with an army full of mercenaries, particularly if they're in leadership positions. So, this is all well and good, right? It's fun and games while it's up here on the screen, and these are silly little characters, and this is just a story that Alan's telling you, but here's kind of where it gets messy. I remember I told you if you are an organizational leader and you're thinking about, man, I'd really like to create a culture-driven organization. Well, here's what you got to do, right? I need for you to start to think about what are these core values that I want my organization to be living and breathing on a daily basis, right? And then I want you to start to think about your team. And I want you to look up at this chart. And I want you to think about first your leadership team and then the rest of your team. And I want you to think about, wow, if I had to put the names of my team members in each one of these quadrants, where would I put them? Who are my peasants? Who are my pages that I'm probably going to need to invest in for the next couple of years to get them where I need them to be? Who are my knights that I need to start elevating and engaging and helping me mentor some pages? And who are the mercenaries in your organization that simply by their presence are undermining the culture within your organization that you're trying to create? Listen, our society is changing, and so is the workplace, right? But the intrinsic need for people to surround themselves with other people who believe what they believe is not changing, right? People still need to be able to trust. People still need to have these shared beliefs and these commonalities, right? And culture is a critical part of building that kind of trust. And organizations that do not work on building an internal culture are going to experience an increasing amount of distrust between their employees. It's just a byproduct of the divergence in values and culture that we're seeing in our society as a whole. Right? But organizations that do focus on becoming strong, culturally driven organizations are going to become cultural beacons. They're going to start to see pages and knights come and apply for jobs within their position or within their organization. Right? And here's the deal. Real culture is so rare that your organization will begin to be known for its culture as much as for its product. Again, think about Chick-fil-A and Google and Apple and Starbucks. Most of what we think about is not necessarily the products that these organizations create. We know them for their culture, right? And culture is not just something for these big national brands. There are organizations in this community that are known for the internal culture that they've created, both positive and negative. So, building a real and tangible corporate culture, one that your customers can feel and that is not just talked about in the boardroom, well, it's no joke, right? It's going to take you getting outside of the box and thinking about your organization differently. It's going to take you looking at your organization through the culture quadrant lens. It's going to take you thinking and looking at your team very differently. But when you do, your organization will become known for the internal culture that it has created. Your organization will become a beacon for culture that will begin to attract these pages and these nights, right? And then, slowly, very slowly, you will start to feel all of your people in your organization begin to row in the same direction. Thank you.